the first time Ethan saw the pride flags go up in downtown Portland. He sneered, turning his coffee cup in his hand so hard it nearly cracked. Pink. Of all colors, gaudy, loud, and in his face, like a child's birthday party gone wrong. He'd spent his 28 years building a life of sharp edges and clean lines. And this rainbow chaos felt like an assault on everything he stood for. He leaned against the brick wall of his favorite coffee shop, the Daily Grind, watching the preparations for the annual Pride Parade. Volunteers buzzed around, hanging banners and stringing lights across the street, their laughter grating against his morning calm. Ethan wasn't a bigot at least. He didn't think Sabbath he'd never understood the need for all this. Why couldn't people just live their lives quietly? Why the spectacle? He muttered under his breath. It's just a circus for attention. A voice, bright and teasing, cut through his thoughts. You know, frowning like that might scare off the rainbows. Ethan turned to see a stranger leaning against the same wall, a few feet away. They had electric pink hair, a leather jacket covered in pins, and a grin that seemed to mock his scowl. Their name, he'd later learn, was Riley, and they were about to turn his world upside down. Ethan grunted, unimpressed. Just not my thing, he said, sipping his coffee. Riley raised an eyebrow, their eyes glinting with something between amusement and challenge. Not your thing, huh? Bet you've never even been to one of these. Too busy hating pink. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't hate anyone, but he'd grown up in a small Oregon town where differences were whispered about, not celebrated. His father, a stern man who valued normalcy above all, had drilled into him that standing out was asking for trouble. Ethan had carried that lesson into adulthood, building a successful real estate business by blending in, keeping his head down, and avoiding anything that screamed different. I don't hate it, he said, his voice clipped. I just don't get why it's such a big deal. Riley laughed, a sound so warm it almost disarmed him. Oh, you'll get it one day. Life's got a funny way of teaching lessons. They pushed off the wall, tossing him a wink before joining the volunteers. Ethan watched them go, their pink hair a beacon in the crowd, and felt a strange tug in his chest annoyance. Maybe, or something else he couldn't name. That evening, Ethan sat in his sleek, minimalist office, reviewing contracts. His company, Sterling Properties, was thriving, and he'd just secured a major deal to develop a new commercial strip downtown. The numbers were clean, the plans precise, everything as it should be. But his mind kept drifting to Riley's grin, to the way they'd called him out without hesitation. He shook it off, focusing on the paperwork. The next morning, Ethan's assistant, Clara, burst into his office, her face pale. Ethan, you need to see this. She handed him her phone, opened to a local news article. The headline read, Local businessman unwittingly funds Pride Parade after donation mix-up. His stomach dropped as he scanned the article. Apparently, a clerical error had redirected a $50,000 donation meant for a city park restoration to the Portland Pride Committee. The donor, Sterling Properties, his company. Ethan's vision blurred with rage. How the hell did this happen? He barked, slamming the phone down. Clara flinched, explaining that a new intern had misread the donation form, and the funds had already been spent on parade floats and security. There was no getting it back. He stormed out of the office, determined to fix this. The Pride Committee's headquarters was a small, colorful building on the edge of downtown, bursting with posters and glittery decorations. Ethan pushed through the door, ready to demand answers, but froze when he saw Riley behind the front desk, sorting flyers. Well, look who's here, Riley said, their smile infuriatingly calm. Our accidental hero. I'm no hero, Ethan snapped. This was a mistake. I want my money back. Riley leaned back, folding their arms. Money spent. Big guy. Floats are built. Permits are paid. You're kind of stuck being the parade's sugar daddy now. Ethan's face burned. He wasn't just angry, felt exposed. Like his carefully controlled world was unraveling. This isn't what I signed up for, he said through gritted teeth. Riley's expression softened. Just for a moment. Maybe it's not what you signed up for, but it's happening. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Ethan didn't have an answer. He turned and left, the bell above the door jangling behind him. Back at his office, he tried to bury himself in work, but the article kept circulating online, his name tied to a cause he'd spent his life dismissing. Friends texted him, some teasing, others confused. His father called, his voice cold. You're making us look like fools. Ethan. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan drove downtown. The streets were quiet, but the pride decorations still glowed under the streetlights. He parked and walked to the parade route, where a half-finished float stood, a massive, glittering heart wrapped in rainbow ribbons. He hated how it made him feel, small, conflicted, and strangely curious. The next day, Ethan returned to the Pride Committee, telling himself it was to negotiate a way out. But Riley was there again, and this time, they didn't let him off easy. You're here, so you might as well help, they said, tossing him a roll of streamers. We're short-handed, and you're technically a sponsor now. Ethan wanted to refuse, but something in Riley's eyes, confidence, defiance, maybe even hope, made him stay. He grabbed the streamers, muttering, "This doesn't mean I'm one of you." Riley just grinned. Sure, tough guy? Keep telling yourself that. As they worked side by side, taping streamers to the float, Riley started talking not about pride, but about their life. They'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes that never felt safe. Coming out as non-binary had been their way of claiming freedom, of refusing to let the world define them. Ethan listened, surprised by how their words chipped away at his defenses. He didn't agree with everything they said, but he couldn't dismiss the raw honesty in their voice. By the end of the day, Ethan's hands were covered in glitter, and he hated how it stuck to his skin. But he didn't hate Riley, and that scared him more than anything. Over the next week, Ethan found himself back at the Pride Committee's headquarters, each visit justified by some flimsy excuse, checking on his donation, clarifying logistics, or delivering paperwork. But deep down, he knew it was Riley. Their quick wit, their unapologetic energy, pulled him in like gravity. He'd catch himself watching them as they directed volunteers or laughed with the crew, their pink hair catching the light like a signal he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as they painted a banner together, Riley asked, "So, what's your deal, Ethan? Why do you hate all this so much?" The question wasn't accusing, just curious, but it hit him like a punch. "I don't hate it," he said, brushing paint onto the canvas. "I just don't get why it has to be so loud. Why can't people just be who they are without making a show of it?" Riley paused, their brush hovering. "Because for some of us, being who we are is the show. It's survival. You ever had to fight just to exist?" Ethan didn't answer. He thought of his father's voice, always in his head, demanding he stay in line, be respectable, avoid trouble. He'd never had to fight for his identity, but he'd spent his life fighting to keep it invisible. Was that so different? The conversation lingered in his mind that night as he sat in his apartment, staring at a bottle of whiskey he didn't touch. His phone buzzed with another text from his father. "Fix this mess. Ethan. Don't let it define you." He deleted it, but the words clung to him. The next day, Ethan arrived at the committee to find Riley in a heated argument with a vendor over a delayed shipment of lights. Riley's voice was sharp, but their hands shook slightly, betraying their stress. Without thinking, Ethan stepped in, using his business charm to smooth things over. The vendor agreed to rush the delivery, and Riley shot him a look of gratitude mixed with surprise. "You didn't have to do that," they said later, as they sat on the curb outside, sharing a coffee. Ethan shrugged. "Seemed like you needed a hand." Riley studied him, their eyes searching. "You're not as tough as you act, are you?" He laughed, a rare sound that felt foreign in his throat. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to keep." Their banter became a routine, a rhythm that carried them through the chaos of parade preparations. Ethan started noticing things he hadn't before: the way volunteers supported each other, the stories behind their passion, the quiet strength in their defiance. He still didn't love the glitter or the pink, but he was starting to see the people behind it. One evening, as they worked late on a float, Riley opened up about the first Pride they'd attended. "I was 16, scared out of my mind," they said, hammering a nail into place. "Thought I'd be laughed at or worse. But when I got there, it was like I could breathe for the first time. Like I wasn't alone." Ethan listened, his hammer still in his hand. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded, and Riley seemed to understand. The closer the parade got, the more Ethan's life split in two. At work, he was still the polished businessman, closing deals and dodging questions about the donation mix-up. But at the committee, he was someone else, someone who laughed more, who didn't flinch when glitter stuck to his jacket, who looked forward to Riley's teasing. Then came the call from his biggest client, a conservative developer named Harold Vance. "Ethan, I'm hearing you're mixed up with that Pride nonsense," Harold said, his voice dripping with disapproval. "I don't work with people who play those games. You in or out?" Ethan's stomach twisted. Losing Vance could tank his business. He thought of his father, of the years spent building sterling properties into something respectable. He thought of Riley, of the float they'd built together, of the way their smile made him question everything. "I'll handle it," he told Vance, his voice steady but his heart racing. That night, he drove to the committee, his mind a storm. Riley was there, sorting wristbands for parade volunteers. They looked up, sensing his mood. "What's wrong? Tough guy?" Ethan hesitated, then told them about Vance. Riley listened, their face unreadable. When he finished, they said, "So, what's it gonna be? Your business or your soul?" It wasn't a fair question, but it cut deep. Ethan didn't answer. He left, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen counter, staring at the city skyline through his window, the lights blurring as his thoughts spiraled. Harold Vance's ultimatum echoed in his head, but so did Riley's question, your business or your soul. He'd built his life on control, on making safe choices, but now he felt like he was standing on a fault line, waiting for it to crack. The next morning, he called Clara into his office. "I need you to draft a statement," he said, his voice low. "Something about the donation mix-up. Say it was an error, but we're honoring it." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? Vance won't like it." "I know," Ethan said, rubbing his temples. "Just do it." The statement went out by noon, and the backlash was immediate. Social media exploded. Some praised his support for Pride. Others called him a sellout. His father left a voicemail. "You're throwing everything away for what? A stunt?" Ethan didn't call back. He headed to the committee, needing to see Riley, though he wasn't sure why. They were outside, helping a group of teens paint signs. Their laughter filled the air, and for a moment, Ethan just watched, struck by how effortlessly they belonged here. "You look like you're carrying the world," Riley said when they spotted him. They handed him a paintbrush. "Want to help?" Ethan took it, the gesture feeling like a lifeline. As they painted, he told them about the statement, about Vance's threat. Riley listened, their expression serious. "You're risking a lot," they said. "Why?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Maybe I'm tired of running from things I don't understand." Riley's eyes softened. That's a start. The days blurred together as the parade loomed closer. Ethan threw himself into the work, not just as a bystander, but as part of the team. He helped build stages, coordinated deliveries, even argued with city officials over permits. The more he did, the more he saw the human side of Pride, the families who showed up to support their kids. The older couples who'd fought for decades to be seen. The kids like Riley who'd found a home in this chaos. One night, after a long day, Riley invited him to a drag show fundraiser at a local bar. Ethan hesitated, had never been to anything like it, but Riley's grin was impossible to refuse. The bar was packed, the air thick with music and laughter. Ethan felt out of place, his button-up shirt stiff among the sequins and leather. But Riley stayed close, introducing him to performers and volunteers. One performer, a drag queen named Sapphire, dedicated her act to the guy who accidentally saved our parade. The crowd cheered, and Ethan's face burned as Riley nudged him, laughing. For the first time, he didn't mind the attention. Later, as they walked back to their cars, Riley stopped under a streetlight. "You're changing. You know," they said, their voice quiet but sure. "Not all at once, but I see it." Ethan wanted to argue, to say he was still the same guy who hated pink and mocked all this. But he couldn't. Because standing there, with Riley's eyes on him and the city alive around them, he felt different. Lighter. Maybe. The next day, Vance called again. "You're making a mistake, Ethan," he said. "I'm pulling my contract. You're done." Ethan's heart sank, but he didn't beg. "If that's your choice, Harold, I respect it." He hung up, his hands shaking. He'd just lost his biggest client, and with it, a chunk of his company's future. But as he looked at the Pride plans on his desk, sketches of floats, schedules he'd helped create, he felt something else. Pride. Maybe. Not the kind with flags and glitter, but the kind that comes from standing up. He drove to the committee, where Riley was waiting. "Vance is out," he told them, his voice steady. Riley didn't say anything at first. They just stepped forward and hugged him, quick and fierce. "Welcome to the fight," they whispered. Ethan didn't pull away. The days leading up to the parade were a whirlwind. Ethan was everywhere hauling supplies, troubleshooting last-minute issues, even painting a float when a volunteer called out sick. He told himself it was just about damage control, about making the best of a bad situation. But the truth was harder to ignore. He was invested, not just in the parade, but in the people, especially Riley. Their connection had grown, subtle but undeniable. A brush of hands while passing tools, a shared laugh over a spilled can of paint, the way Riley's eyes lingered on him when they thought he wasn't looking. Ethan didn't know what to call it, but it felt like standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. One afternoon, as they tested sound equipment on the main stage, Riley turned to him. "You ever think about who you are, Ethan? Like, really think about it?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've spent your life playing it safe, following rules. But what do you want? Not your dad, not your clients, you." Ethan's throat tightened. He'd never let himself ask that question. His life had been a series of checkboxes, good grades, good job, good reputation. But now, surrounded by people who lived so fiercely, so unapologetically, he felt the weight of those boxes for the first time. I don't know, he said finally. I've never had to think about it. Riley nodded, like they'd expected that answer. Maybe it's time you did. That night, Ethan went home and pulled out an old photo album he hadn't touched in years. Pictures of himself as a kid, always serious, always trying to please his father. In one photo, he was 10, wearing a bright blue jacket his mother had bought him. His father had hated it, said it was too flashy. Ethan had never worn it again. He closed the album, his chest tight. For the first time, he wondered what he'd given up to be the man his father wanted. The next day, he showed up at the committee with a new energy. He didn't just help, he led, taking charge of a float crew when Riley was swamped. The volunteers noticed, teasing him about his glow-up. Even Riley raised an eyebrow, impressed. You're getting good at this, they said, handing him a clipboard. Careful, you might start liking it. Maybe I already do, Ethan shot back, surprising himself. The night before the parade, the committee threw a volunteer party at a local community center. Ethan hesitated but went, drawn by the promise of seeing Riley outside the chaos of work. The room was alive with music, laughter, and stories, people sharing their reasons for being there, their struggles, their triumphs. Ethan sat in a corner, listening, feeling like an outsider but not wanting to leave. Riley found him, holding 2 beers. They sat together, and for a while, they just talked about music, about Portland's quirks, about nothing and everything. Then Riley's tone shifted. My first foster home, they said, staring at the bottle in their hands. They told me I was broken, that I'd never be enough. Pride, it's not just a party. It's proof they were wrong. Ethan's heart ached. He wanted to say something, to reach out, but all he could manage was, you're more than enough. Riley looked at him, their eyes bright with something unspoken. Then they leaned in, just enough that their shoulder brushed his. It was small, but it felt like a promise. The moment was interrupted by a call from Clara. Ethan, we've got a problem, she said, her voice urgent. Vance is spreading rumors. Says you're using Pride to scam investors. It's all over social media. Ethan's blood ran cold. He stepped outside, scrolling through posts accusing him of exploiting the parade for clout. His father's voice rang in his head. You're making us look like fools. Riley followed him out. What's going on? He showed them the posts, his hands shaking. This could ruin me. Riley's jaw tightened. Then fight back. Not with words, with who you are. Show up tomorrow. Be there. Ethan didn't sleep that night, torn between fear and something fiercer. By morning, he'd made his choice. Parade day dawned bright and chaotic. Downtown Portland buzzed with energy music blaring, flags waving, crowds spilling onto the streets. Ethan arrived early, his stomach knotted with nerves. He hadn't just shown up to help, he'd decided to march. Not as a bystander, but as part of the parade, with the committee's float. Riley found him near the staging area, their eyes widening when they saw him. He was wearing a simple white shirt, but he'd pinned a small rainbow badge to eat a last-minute choice that felt like a declaration. You're really doing this, Riley said, their voice a mix of surprise and pride. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. Yeah. I'm done hiding. The parade was a sensory overload, colors, sounds, and emotions colliding. Ethan walked beside Riley, holding one end of a banner that read, Love Wins. The crowd cheered, their energy infectious, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider. He felt seen, not for his business or his name, but for showing up. Halfway through the route, he spotted his father in the crowd. The older man stood stiffly, his face a mask of disapproval. Ethan's steps faltered, but Riley's hand brushed his arm, grounding him. He kept walking, his head high. After the parade, the committee gathered at a nearby park for a celebration. Ethan was exhausted but alive in a way he'd never felt before. Riley pulled him aside, their expression serious. "You did good today," they said. "But this isn't the end. People like Vance, they don't stop." Ethan knew they were right. The rumors were still spreading, and his business was taking hits. But as he looked at Riley, at the community around them, he realized something. He wasn't alone anymore. That evening, he drafted a public response to Vance's accusations, posting it on his company's website. It was short but clear. Sterling Properties stands by its support for Portland Pride. "We believe in community, in courage, and in love." He hit publish, his heart pounding. The response went viral. Support poured in, clients he'd thought he'd lost, strangers who'd seen the parade, even some of his old high school friends. But there were critics too, calling him a traitor, a fraud. His father called again, but Ethan let it go to voicemail. Later, he met Riley at a quiet diner. They sat across from each other, the weight of the day settling between them. "You're not who I thought you were," Riley said, their voice soft. "Neither are you," Ethan replied. He hesitated, then reached for their hand. Riley didn't pull away. The moment was interrupted by a news alert on Ethan's phone. Local businessman's pride support sparks debate. The article quoted Vance, who called Ethan's actions a betrayal of traditional values. But it also quoted parade attendees, who called him a hero. Ethan turned off his phone. "Let them talk," he said, surprising himself with how little he cared. Riley smiled, squeezing his hand. "You're learning." The fallout from the parade was relentless. Ethan's office became a battleground, angry emails from former clients, supportive calls from new ones, and a steady stream of reporters wanting his story. He hired a PR firm to manage the chaos, but the real work was internal. He was still figuring out who he was in this new reality. Riley became his anchor. They met almost daily, sometimes at the coffee shop, sometimes at the committee's office, which was now transitioning to year-round advocacy work. Their conversations ranged from light arguing over the best food trucks in Portland heavy, like when Riley shared their fears of being visible in a world that didn't always accept them. One evening, as they walked along the Willamette River, Riley stopped. "I need to tell you something," they said, their voice unsteady. "I like you, Ethan. More than I should. Maybe. But I don't know if you're ready for this." Ethan's heart raced. He'd felt it to the pull, the connection, but he hadn't named it. He'd spent so long avoiding anything that felt too big, too real. "I don't know what I'm ready for," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to lose this. Whatever it is." Riley's smile was tentative but warm. "Okay. Let's figure it out together." They started spending more time together, not just as friends, but as something undefined, something that scared and thrilled Ethan in equal measure. He began to notice the small things, how Riley's laugh could shift his entire mood, how their touch lingered in his mind long after they parted. At work, Ethan made changes. He diversified his client base, seeking out businesses that aligned with his new perspective. It wasn't easy. Some deals fell through, and the financial strain was real, but he felt a clarity he'd never had before. One day, he got a call from a lawyer representing Vance. They were suing him for breach of contract, claiming his public support for Pride violated their agreement. Ethan's stomach sank, but he wasn't surprised. He hired a lawyer of his own, determined to fight. Riley was there when he got the news, sitting with him in his office as he processed it. "You're not alone in this," they said, their voice firm. "We've got your back." "We?" Ethan asked. "The community," Riley said. "You showed up for us. Now we show up for you." The committee rallied. organizing a fundraiser to help with Ethan's legal fees. Volunteers he'd barely spoken to showed up, offering support, sharing their own stories of fighting for acceptance. Ethan was overwhelmed, not just by their generosity, but by the realization that he was part of something bigger now. One night, as he and Riley worked late on fundraiser plans, Ethan found himself opening up. "I used to think all this pride, the flags, the noise was pointless," he said. "But it's not. It's about people. About you." Riley looked at him, their eyes soft. "Took you long enough," they teased, but their voice cracked with emotion. Ethan leaned in, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He kissed them, tentative at first, then sure. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a choice, a step into a world he'd spent his life avoiding. The kiss changed everything. Ethan and Riley didn't define it, didn't slap a label on what they were, but they didn't need to. They were together, navigating this new terrain with a mix of excitement and fear. Ethan started to see the world through Riley's eyes, the beauty in its messiness, the strength in its differences. But the lawsuit loomed like a storm cloud. Ethan's lawyer warned him it could drag on for months, draining his resources and reputation. He threw himself into work, balancing legal prep with his growing role at the committee. Riley was there through it all, challenging him, supporting him, making him laugh when the weight felt too heavy. One afternoon, as they sorted donations for a community outreach program, Ethan found a pink scarf among the items. He held it up, smirking. "This you're doing?" Riley laughed. "Nope, but you'd rock it." On a whim, Ethan draped it around his neck. It was ridiculous, bright, and completely unlike Heimer who he used to be. Riley's eyes lit up, and for a moment, they just stood there, laughing like kids. The moment was interrupted by a call from Ethan's lawyer. "Good news," she said. "Vance's case is shaky. We've got evidence he's been bad-mouthing you to tank your business. It's defamation. We can countersue." Ethan felt a surge of hope, but also exhaustion. He didn't want to fight forever. He just wanted to live. That night, he and Riley went to the rooftop of his apartment building, the city sprawling below them. "I don't know how to do this," Ethan said, staring at the skyline. "Be this person I'm becoming. It's like I'm starting over." Riley took his hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. Just keep showing up." The fundraiser was a success, raising enough to cover Ethan's legal fees and then some. The extra funds went to a youth shelter for queer kids, a cause Riley had championed. Ethan watched them speak at the event, their passion lighting up the room, and felt a pride he'd never known, not for himself, but for them. As the legal battle heated up, Ethan's father showed up at his office unannounced. "You're throwing your life away," he said, his voice cold. "For what? A cause you don't even believe in." "I believe in it now," Ethan said, his voice steady. "And I believe in me." His father left without another word, and Ethan knew that bridge might be burned for good. But he didn't feel empty. He felt free. The lawsuit ended faster than Ethan expected. Vance settled out of court, dropping his claims in exchange for Ethan not pursuing defamation. It wasn't a total victory. Ethan's business took a hit, and some clients never came back, but it was enough. He'd kept his integrity, his truth. With Riley, things deepened. They didn't move too fast, didn't rush to define what they were, but they built something real. Late-night talks turned into shared mornings, small gestures into promises. Ethan started wearing color, nothing wild, just a blue scarf here, a green jacket there. He didn't hate pink anymore. The committee offered him a permanent role, and he took it, balancing it with his business. He found a new rhythm, one that felt like his own. He and Riley worked together on outreach programs, focusing on kids who needed a safe place to be themselves. Every time Ethan saw a kid light up, he thought of Riley at 16, finding their place at Pride. One year after the parade, Ethan stood on the same downtown street, watching the flags go up again. This time, he wasn't sneering. He was helping, laughing with Riley as they hung a banner. The city felt different now, not louder, but fuller, alive. As they worked, Riley slipped their hand into his. "You ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't messed up that donation?" they asked, their voice teasing but warm. Ethan laughed. "I'd probably still be miserable. And you'd still be annoying." Riley grinned, pulling him close. "Worth it." That night, Ethan looked at the skyline from his rooftop, Riley beside him. He thought of the kid in the blue jacket, the man who'd hidden behind sharp edges, the person he was becoming. He didn't have all the answers, but he had this, a community, a purpose, a love he hadn't expected. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, he heard his father's voice, fainter now, drowned out by the sound of his own.